Hello and welcome to Journalist Hangout UK, the show where we discuss issues both African and worldwide which are affecting the continents. And we look at how those issues are seen at home and in the African diaspora. I'm Thamsanqa Zhou and I'm pleased to welcome our panel. Vuyiswa Ngqobongwana, who is a broadcaster, Lanre Akinola, editor of African Business, and Juliana Olayinka, journalist and very good broadcaster. Welcome to you.
Thank you,
We know we will hang out very well. But this is a week where we look at the death of Morgan Tsvangirai, the opposition leader in Zimbabwe. But we know that there are also issues in Libya where the election is going to be held. And they have allowed Muammar Gaddafi's son to participate. Some say that is good democracy. And cocoa bean grower uses the Valentine's Day to pitch Ugandan chocolate as some of the world's best things you can ever think about.
Wonderful.
But the big story this week has to be this.
A new decision has been made by the ANC, whose effect is that I have now been compelled to resign by way of a motion of no confidence.
Vuyiswa, this is
Yes.
home for you and me. Mo Ibrahim is giving out $5 million for those leaders who did very well. Do you think President Zuma or former President Zuma will be a candidate?
There are very few African leaders who deserve any reward for doing very well, but it's not because of them as personalities, but more due to the foundation upon which they're trying to play democracy. And I use the word play because they didn't have a chance of actually making it real because of what they inherited. Let's not forget, South Africa wasn't handed to us on a plate. Nelson Mandela didn't spend 27 years in jail for us to be handed our freedom. It was never going to be that easy. We knew it was not going to work that way, but we didn't know the exact mechanisms for sabotaging all those wonderful, noble sounding words that he spoke when he came out of jail, and that inspired Zuma and the ANC and the millions of South Africans to stay behind Zuma come hook or crook, because we were supporting a principle. Meanwhile, something insidious was going on, but we will talk about that perhaps later.
Yes. Juliana, let me come to you. Nelson Mandela, great man, great party, the ANC, the oldest organization in Africa. Do you think President or former President Zuma has spoiled that legacy?
You can't spoil the legacy of Nelson Mandela, but clearly we've just listened to a reluctant resignation speech from an embattled president who has been embroiled in scandal upon scandal upon scandal. Of course, we know that the South African economy shrunk underneath him. And although, you know, the ANC did say that it was with a heavy heart that, you know, they had to recall him, I think, you know, you can say that the past 9-10 years that Zuma had been in power, that he really kind of destroyed, I think, I don't want to say he destroyed the legacy of the ANC, but even, you know, its most strongest supporters, you know, withdrew because of the dire corruption scandals.
Yeah, let me bring in Lanre. It was the economy that brought down apartheid because the sanctions were imposed and they gave in. It would appear that it is the economy and the rand and business that has brought down Zuma.
Well, it certainly hasn't helped. It's an important moment for South Africa, his resignation. People are quite optimistic about this being an opportunity to put South Africa back on track economically. But the problem South Africa faces precede Jacob Zuma. You know, you can't lay it all at his and the Gupta family's feet. There's a lot of work to be done, and Cyril Ramaphosa certainly has his work cut out for him. This is the beginning of the work for South Africa, not the end of the problem.
Oh, well, Vuyiswa, but Cyril Ramaphosa is coming in. He's got goodwill politically within the ANC, outside the ANC, the unions, business.
Yeah.
Surely this is as easy as it can get.
Well, it looks good on paper, and I think what we have to look at as Africans is the paradigm from which we are looking at our own problems. I can't look through the lens of a Western white person because I'm not. right? And that's why I keep coming back to what Lanre already mentioned, and I mentioned earlier. What was this foundation upon which he was supposed to build something so fantastic that we are now going to castigate him for not succeeding in so doing? As one analyst in South Africa said, Zuma is a personality, but he works in a system. And we need to get away from the cult of personality and look in the true Ubuntu way, the collective interest. Right? And that is what I'm excited about for Ramaphosa to build. I cannot think of anyone more qualified in terms of his labor movement experience, in terms of gathering collectives and understanding the consciousness of its own people and helping them to raise that consciousness rather than castigating them for not being up to speed with what the Western world knows and then judging them in that way. And that's what I like to avoid in any discussion on Africa. So Ramaphosa, who helped the labor movement, who was very supportive of the South African Communist Party, and who has strong respect in the ANC, that triad needs to come back together, because that's what Zuma's reign destroyed. And that's when the insidious business networks like the Gupta family could come in. The Guptas arrived in perfect timing, early 90s, and now have such astronomical wealth, they couldn't spend it in many lifetimes. Yeah. How did that happen? That's what needs to be examined and avoided again.
Yeah, Juliana, let me come to you. You're very good at bringing people together. Ramaphosa has a problem in that the ANC itself is split. The Zuma camp was slate and the Ramaphosa slate, and he doesn't have the majority in the top 6. But also we know that the economic freedom fighters want to give him a run for his money in parliament, and he's got the whole of South Africa to bring. How do you think he can do all these things?
Well, I think, the timing of Zuma's resignation and the final push, would you say, is really timely. Of course, he's been in power for 9 years. So for me, I kind of felt like, well, there's no way Zuma's going to resign because, there's an election next year. Why would you resign so soon when you're going anyway? But I think, the ANC realised, that it would be really tight at the election. And if they don't show the people, that they were strong enough to push Zuma, then, they may not win the election coming forward. So I think it's important that they now come together. That's going to be very hard. Of course, it is fractured. And again, if we talk about Ramaphosa, a lot of people are saying, where did his wealth actually come from? We know that he is extremely wealthy. Who knows if he will actually be able to curb corruption, which is one of the mandates that he's coming in on, when really, we're not exactly sure of where his wealth came from.
Hold on a minute. Can I just say, I think when you're talking about this small strata of super rich South Africans that have managed to do very well over the last 20 years, that's been part of the mechanism that has created where we are today. And that's part of the analysis that the ANC will now start to deconstruct. Just because Ramaphosa did well on riding the wave of that doesn't mean he's corrupt, because the way that wave was created was perhaps corrupt. And that's important to remember. Otherwise, we throw the baby out with the bathwater again.
Yeah, okay. Lanre, you understand these issues with business. Ramaphosa, his wife, Motsepe, his brother-in-law, if you take the three of them, they probably have more wealth than a sizable percentage of South Africa. But when you look at what's before Ramaphosa now, doing the State of the Nation address, the budget, and everything coming up, he is a deployee of the ANC and does not necessarily decide the direction on his own. So how do you think he needs to manage the transition going forward?
Well, the problem hasn't changed. South Africa needs serious structural reform in its economy. Here we are, 24 years since the end of apartheid, and the economic inequalities that were built into apartheid have more or less stayed the same, and that is the key challenge for South Africa economically. Jacob Zuma has talked about radical economic transformation for many years. Even Ramaphosa is talking about it, because they all understand that with 28% unemployment and a huge education crisis in terms of an unemployable generation of people coming through, and that structural disconnect between rich and poor in the country, that without radical economic transformation, South Africa will always struggle to move forward. Yeah. People who own companies and own shares on the JSE will do very well, but they will do very well no matter what happens. Exactly how he's going to do this is that is the big question. It is not going to be easy no matter what his basis is. He has goodwill now. He needs to use that goodwill, but he also has to be very serious and make some very, very difficult decisions here.
Let me come in there and say it is a week where we saw people being reminded of Robert Mugabe leaving. In Ethiopia, Addis Ababa, of course, Prime Minister Desalegn also stepping down with different kind of problems. In South Africa, knowing that there are all these education challenges, healthcare, and all the aspirations post 1994. But if I start with you, Juliana, just maybe a minute, how do you think Zuma's legacy will be shaped going forward?
I don't know, the South African democracy is obviously very young, as are most democracies on the continent, but I think it's given people a little bit of hope. Again, the timing, that's the only issue I have, because he spent 9 years in office. There's an election next year. You know, we were going to usher in a new president anyway. So I kind of feel like it was a little bit too late. And also again, you know, we can't forget what he put into the ANC and, you know, fighting for the freedoms of others. But then I look at Zuma, you know, coming from Nigeria, that corruption is rife on the continent anyway. So to use corruption to hold him and say, you know, this is what he done and he's bad, bad, bad. Corruption on the continent is so endemic that I wouldn't hold that to Zuma to say this is the bad thing he's done.
Lanre, 30 seconds, how should Zuma be remembered?
Oh God, that's a difficult one. He has to be remembered for his lifetime in the ANC, not the last decade or so. The problems of the ANC, the decline of the ANC also preceded Jacob Zuma. It has been fading as a political force for some time. He should be remembered for his contribution over the last 30, 40 years of his life, not just the last decade.
Tate, Zuma, how should he be remembered? Very quickly.
Okay, Zuma cannot be blamed for the problems South Africa is facing. Zuma is a perfect example of how South Africa needs to examine itself in the future and actually ask itself, how are we going to elect our leaders? How do we bring Ubuntu to life? And at the same time, respect the legacy that this man has created for our revolution.
Okay, thank you. But we're still hanging out. Don't go anywhere. Now, we'll take a very quick break. We have plenty more to discuss, so please join us in a few moments. Hello and welcome back to Journalist Hangout UK. I'm Thamsanqa Zhou and I'm pleased to welcome back our panel, Vuyiswa Ngqobongwana, Lanre Akinola, and Juliana Olayinka. Now, we were talking about South Africa, we're talking about corruption, but maybe Juliana first. I want to move to the issues with Oxfam, what happens with aid, and what we actually saw in Haiti, and the president of Haiti coming out and making that public complaint against what was done in his own country, of course, before he was in power. And you were speaking before about all this and how strongly you feel about what actually happens.
Yeah, it's kind of, you know, the aid agency's Harvey Weinstein moment. I think this is just the tip of the iceberg. I think for a very long time, a lot of aid agencies, not just Oxfam, of course, we know there are many others, kind of been unregulated, going in. I don't want to say the white superiority complex. We've all seen it, you know, the picture of the one westernized person in the group of lots of Black, Asian kids, you know, kind of like looking up to them saying, thank you for coming. But what we've realized under this scandal is that a lot of people have been abused. I don't want to say that Oxfam were caught up in a prostitution scandal, because how do we know that these women were prostitutes? We don't know that. A lot of these women who were involved in the sex scandal could have been underage, could have been drugged. Lots of the allegations are widely all over the place at the moment. We don't know exactly what happened, but we know that victims were abused by people they should have trusted.
Yeah, Vuyiswa, isn't that where the problem is, where some of these things are being spoken about? People in Africa will tell you this has been going on for a very long time.
Yes.
But we never get reports that say an investigation has actually been done and action has been taken that satisfies the victims as well as the organizations that sent them.
Well, certainly we've got a chance to get that report and that long overdue examination of a situation that's just endemic throughout the universe. So why should the charity sector be excluded from that? But the fact that it happened in Haiti, of all places, really sticks in the throat of most Pan-Africanists who really look at Haiti as the greatest betrayal to humankind, but the most hidden dark secret in history, just because they had a victory against a short man called Napoleon Bonaparte. All of that must now be just expunged from history. And part of Oxfam just wandering in there and pretty much having free rein to do what they want was assisted by an overall system that perpetuates that environment of just taking a side eye to Haiti because they really don't know the history. And the beautiful thing for the charity aid sector, coming back to Oxfam, because I used to work for them, and I have never seen a more dedicated group of people with integrity and desire to change humanity ever. They inspired me and politically educated me. Regardless of color, color was not a factor, right? But it does become a factor in the bigger picture. So when these people get transplanted to Africa or Haiti with their idealism, but no education about the culture of the people, their own human frailties become dominant. That's all that happened in Haiti. Nothing extraordinary and not peculiar to Oxfam either.
Yeah, Lanre, when we look at how much money or how much help actually comes from aid and some of these agencies, and you compare that to what then happens on the ground when you look at Central African Republic and the French and the allegations that there were child sex abuses, when you look at what has happened in the Congo, Sierra Leone, all these other areas, how would we put a value to the aid that's coming in and compare that, balance it against the negative from the other end?
How long do I have for this question? that's
we are hanging out,
It's an immoral question.
That's a big one there. As we've already established, this isn't an Oxfam thing, right? This is a dynamic that you will see across the board and not just in charities or aid agencies. There was a report last month that didn't really gain much traction about the UN and sexual misconduct within the UN system. It's very real. It's good that there's scrutiny because clearly there are things that need to be changed. There are processes that need to be changed. There are governance issues that need to be sorted out. And if this can act as a catalyst for that, that has to be good news. I think that we need to be careful, though, not to get too broad a brush here and completely negate the work that is done by organizations like Oxfam and UN aid agencies and other types of interventions around the world. Because on balance, I suspect most people at Oxfam take their work quite seriously and do it and carry it out with integrity. And something that would be very bad here is if there's a backlash that sees an organization like Oxfam being stripped of its funding, which will undermine a lot of the good work that's being done. By all means, you have to tackle this, you have to root this out, and you have to be unequivocal about that. And so far, it seems like Oxfam has responded finally, it's taken them some time, but they seem to be taking it seriously. They seem to be responding appropriately. But we have to be nuanced here as well, because a lot of good work does get done.
Right, Juliana, I know in the United Kingdom, for instance, there has been pressure on the government to stop the funding that is going to foreign aid. And there are particular groups, especially to the right, who are actually now making formal noises that this money should actually be spent at home rather than abroad, and that pressure continues. How do you see these allegations and these problems giving oxygen to those calls by those that are against aid in the first place being given to foreign countries?
Yeah, I think in the UK, most of the people that are against giving aid are really the voting public. I can't see the UK government stopping giving aid because there are a few calls. But going back to something Lanre mentioned, and Oxfam on a whole, and these aid agencies on a whole, not we can't kind of look at them and say that it's a wide brushstroke. The issue is, and the particular senior figure within Oxfam who is accused of these hate crimes, is that he had been accused of sex crimes before. It was well documented almost 15 years ago that when he was in Liberia, he was involved in sex parties. He was forced to resign, and then he worked in Asia with another charity. And he was covered up. This was all covered up. So clearly there is a real issue within Oxfam and a lot of these aid agencies at kind of allowing senior figures to do what they want and go unregulated just to cover up what they're doing. I don't think if this hadn't been kind of, leaked, that we would really be talking about it. So I definitely think there's a fundamental issue that needs to be approached and targeted. But then, of course, I think the governments where these aid agencies are working in, they also need to take some responsibility. There's no point, the Haitian president saying, oh, this is wrong, this is wrong. Yeah. What's wrong with your country? Why are these people even there and acting and doing everything that they are able to do?
I'll come to you, but let me start with Lanre, because you travel a lot. You go to Africa, you see people working for the UN, for all these charities, and the lifestyle they lead over there compared to the locals. So what do you think about this two-tier expert local system?
It's a striking contradiction in that aid work is usually quite luxurious work, and which is difficult to reconcile with what you're doing. There's certainly a case to be made that some of the funding could be channeled a little bit more effectively, fewer 4x4s, maybe less business class travel and this kind of thing. For many people, it is a lifestyle that is completely out of step with, with the people that they're working with, and it's very much a problem. Unfortunately, we're not really talking about that. That is probably going to continue. But yes, if you're a banker, that's what you do. You're about money. If you're a charity worker, you should not be about money. You should be about people. And quite frankly, it's a very comfortable expatriate lifestyle that, I'm not sure it makes a lot of sense.
Vuyiswa, you worked in the area. Do you think this is all about global engagement, or maybe there are other things that need to be done? And also consider the fact that will this increase the risk to those aid workers who are not from those countries?
Well, that is the thing. I hope that this discussion, this sensationalist occasion, because that's all it is, gives us an opportunity to go back to basics. When I used to work for War on Want, I remember some slogan that said something to the effect of, you can either give a man a fish or teach him to fish. The charity sector, the humanitarian sector, have they really been teaching Africans to become self-sufficient? Because I was working in the sector 40 years ago. So what has been happening in those 40 years to be teaching Africans? There should be some evidence of rooted infrastructures within Africa after all this charitable assistance has been coming. So that's the question we should be asking as Africans. Thank you for the fish, but I'd like to learn how to fish or have access to areas where I can fish. That's really the debate that needs to go on. Everything else is just fluff and drama and distraction for the main issue. And it's unfortunate that the right wing and left wings are having their proxy wars about cash or lack of cash to this sector because of this sensationalist thing.
Yeah, one thing that I like about hanging out is sometimes we come up with very good solutions that might actually be taken by governments, by organizations and institutions. And
but the beautiful thing is African organizations are now getting some headlines leading the charity sector. This is where I would like my focus to be on, and the money to pour in. And let's have a word for the British public, because we are here, and how generous they are every year pouring in money, 300 million. from the public. That's a lot of money for people who are supposed to be racist and anti-African. Humanity loves humanity, and that's what we need to focus on.
I wish we could continue, but time is always difficult. I have to take you guys for a cup of coffee. For those that are at home, this was a week when we looked at a scenario in Zimbabwe losing their leader, and also South Africa, Jacob Zuma stepping down, Ramaphosa taking over, and in Ethiopia, Prime Minister Desalegn leaving power, saying that that will help his country to heal and stop the conflict. Don't forget to follow us on Real JH UK on Facebook, on Twitter, and Instagram. I'm Thamsanqa Zhou from the entire team here in London. Goodbye, and thank you for watching Journalists Hangout UK.